Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
A few empty pill bottles, a small bedroom in Brentwood, California, August 4th, 1962. This scene has been indelibly burned into our collective imagination. For 30 years, these images have defined a tragedy, because 30 years ago this month, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. Her death was ruled to be a probable suicide, the result of an overdose of sleeping pills. But since the night of August 4th, 1962, a controversy has raged as to what really happened in Marilyn's bedroom on that hot summer night. This controversy and the truth behind the images is the focus of our broadcast tonight. Welcome to Hollywood and the Marilyn Files. We're coming to you from a Hollywood soundstage, a place where Marilyn Monroe spent some of the best times of her life. In order to make some of the details of our story clear, we've constructed this replica of Marilyn's bedroom. Now, because in this story, the details are everything. And with me this evening is Jane Wallace.
On this, the 30th anniversary of her death, Marilyn Monroe is everywhere. And behind each sensational headline, it seems there's a different theory about the strange events surrounding her death. Tonight, you're going to meet the people behind the theories, men and women who were there during Marilyn Monroe's final days. For the first time, they're appearing all in one place at one time to finally put her case before the American public. Some of what they have to say is startling. Some of it is disillusioning. All of it is the truth as they see it. Ultimately, it's up to you to come to your own conclusion about what really happened on August 4th, 1962. Let's meet our guests now.
To Bob Slater, Marilyn was one of his closest friends.
She seemed to have a certain radiance when she walked into a room, which I have found very few people to have, that could pretty much hold you spellbound.
Actress Terry Moore knew Marilyn's private side.
She was a very simple girl, and I mean that in the nicest sense. She was not complicated. She was Norma Jean, who when she put on this beautiful, glamorous makeup became Marilyn Monroe.
At the time of Marilyn's death, Jeannie Carmen was her neighbor and close friend.
Once the doors were closed, she was Norma Jean, just a normal girl. She didn't use all that crazy talk or lip motion. She was just a normal kid that wore dirty bathrobes and everything.
Lionel Grandison was a deputy coroner's aide when the body of Marilyn Monroe was brought in for an autopsy. He believes a massive cover-up was already in progress. Jack Clemens was the first police officer to arrive at Marilyn's home the night she died. James Hall was an ambulance driver who was convinced that he witnessed Marilyn Monroe being murdered. Dr. James Fox is a pathologist who has reopened the medical files on Marilyn Monroe. He has uncovered major discrepancies in the official accounts of her death. John Miner was the Deputy District Attorney of Los Angeles. He was privy to some of the most confidential information about the true circumstances of Marilyn's death. At the time of Marilyn Monroe's death, Sam Yorty was the mayor of Los Angeles. He believed at the time, and still believes today, that the true circumstances of Marilyn's death were covered up.
Throughout the course of tonight's broadcast, these men and women will be appearing to share their stories. Some of them believe that Marilyn Monroe was deliberately murdered. And it's important to remember that even though this alleged crime took place 30 years ago, there's no statute of limitations on murder.
Tonight, we've also assembled our own panel of prosecutors who will hear the evidence, cross-examine our guests, and ultimately give their opinions on whether a murder took place that night. Each member of our panel has been chosen for his or her background in criminal law. John Monnier is a former assistant district attorney from Houston, Texas. He served as lead prosecutor in the organized crime unit. Charles Graddick is a former attorney general from the state of Alabama. Kate Baird is a former assistant DA from Kansas City, Kansas. Joseph Fusco is the former Atlantic County prosecutor from New Jersey. And finally, Mary Toussignan is a former district attorney from York County, Maine. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
When we come back, we're going to look at the relationship between Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys. Some believe this relationship may have cost her life and resulted in the massive cover-up that followed. So stay with us.
When we come back, we'll document a romance that began as a woman's dream and may have ended as her worst nightmare.
Great looks for school!
Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
Tonight we're going to tell you what we've discovered concerning the cover-up surrounding the death of Marilyn Monroe. Throughout the course of this broadcast, we'll be showing you where you can write to add your name to a petition calling for an official reopening of the case. Only an official investigation can uncover the truth. To begin, we need to learn more about the real Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe was many things to many people. Sex symbol, superstar, frightened orphan, lover. Those lucky enough to call her friend say her real self was very different from her sex pot image. Marilyn, they say, had a weakness for powerful and intelligent men. She had affairs with many. Some said they would marry her and did, like Arthur Miller and Joe DiMaggio. Some were already married themselves, like President John Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Marilyn's friends believe her weakness for the Kennedy brothers may have ultimately proved fatal.
If Marilyn Monroe was the greatest star on the movie scene, John F. Kennedy was her counterpart in the political world. The two were destined to meet, and in 1954, a casual introduction turned into a love affair. The two saw each other often. Recently uncovered FBI reports placed the pair at frequent rendezvous at the Carlisle Hotel in New York. Later, the two were assisted in their meetings by the Secret Service, or, more often, with the help of Jack Kennedy's brother-in-law, Peter Lawford. Their romantic relationship was no great secret.
Jack Kennedy in person had such charisma, even more so than it ever photographed. Not only was he a handsome, attractive man, but he was the #1 man in the world, most powerful man in the whole world. And Marilyn loved powerful men. She loved intellectual men, intelligent men. He was certainly everything that any woman could visualize, Jack Kennedy. He was every woman's dream.
I kind of think Jack was a bit of a user, and he wanted to make sure that he hit every woman that was around that he wanted to hit. He hated to know that he might miss one.
It was pretty well known. Rumors were all over the place. There was another actress that Jack was supposed to meet down in Palm Springs, and they would close the door and the FBI would guard the place.
As the pressures of John Kennedy's presidency increased, he had to distance himself more and more from Marilyn. In an attempt to placate her, Jack sent his brother Robert, the Attorney General of the United States, to Los Angeles to speak with Marilyn. By early 1962, what had started as an infatuation with Jack Kennedy had become a passionate love affair with Bobby. At first, Marilyn was living out a dream.
With Bobby, she believed he loved her. She really believed that he loved her and that he would be president and that she would be first lady.
Marilyn bought it all the way. She thought that he was going to marry her and leave the family. She was naive enough to think that he really cared and that it would work. I don't know what he told her, if he said that he wasn't happy with the family or what, but in the heat of passion, he must have said something interesting because she bought it.
Much has been written about Marilyn's state of mind on the day she died. According to these accounts, she was falling apart, her professional and personal life shaky. Filming had been suspended on her picture in progress, Something's Got to Give. Marilyn was rumored to be addicted to sleeping pills. distraught at the prospect of her career ending in a blaze of lawsuits. These events were said to be a prelude to her suicide, but these rumors may obscure the real story. Less than a week before her death, responding to the demands of her co-star Dean Martin, Marilyn had been rehired on the picture, and her salary went from $100,000 to $500,000. By all accounts, she was looking forward to going back to work.
Unfortunately, too many people have hung crepe where it doesn't belong. In the first place, that last week of her life, she was reinstated at her old studio to finish the picture. Number one. Number two, she had bought 2 brand new wardrobes at Saks Fifth Avenue. She had made plans to go back and close up the lease on her apartment back in New York the following month, which would have been September. For a person depressed and a person anticipating suicide, allegedly, this certainly was not characteristic from where I sit.
She was as happy as I've ever seen her. She looked better than I'd ever seen her. There isn't anything bad that I could really say about Marilyn. She was just a great friend and a great person. She enjoyed disguising herself in various forms. Sometimes she would go out dressed as a boy in just various disguises, and I like that sort of thing too. And I certainly don't think she was suicidal at the time of her death.
In a moment, we'll be talking with Bob Slaitzer, author of The Marilyn Files, the book on which this program is based. We're going to take you through the official story of Marilyn's death, an official story that some say is a complete fabrication. So stay with us.
When we come back, the police officer who discovered Marilyn Monroe's body tells the real story about what he found. A story that points straight to foul play. Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
This is a replica of where it all happened, Marilyn Monroe's bedroom in Brentwood. It's important to understand where it happened because this has great bearing on the different accounts of what happened.
Over the years, many different accounts of Marilyn's death have emerged. The official story is based on the word of 2 people who were in Marilyn's bedroom that final night: her psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, and Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray. Their accounts are riddled with inconsistencies, not the least of which are the various times when things were supposed to have happened. Their stories have also changed dramatically over time.
Now, the first person to notice that something was fishy was a police sergeant named Jack Clemens. His story begins at 4:25 in the morning when police were finally officially called.
At 4:25 in the morning on August 5th, 1962, Jack Clemens, a veteran police sergeant working the graveyard shift, received a phone call that would change his life. It was from Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson.
She's dead.
Greenson told him that Marilyn was dead.
We'll be right there. What's the address? This is 8L10.
On the way to Marilyn's house, I radioed the dispatcher to have 8L20 Sergeant Iannone meet me at the location. I also requested 885, the patrol car in the area, to that location to handle traffic.
A few minutes later, Clemens arrived at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive to begin his investigation. What he would find there would shock him and ultimately end his career in law enforcement.
I went to the door and Mrs. Murray admitted me. She showed me into Marilyn's bedroom. Marilyn was laying face down on the bed. Her face was buried in a pillow. Best way I can describe it, it was a soldier's position when she was face down.
Who found the body?
I did.
I asked who discovered this scene. Mrs. Murray said she did. I said, well, tell me about it. This is Mrs. Murray's story to me. She said,
when I went to bed about 10 o'clock, saw the light under Marilyn's door, and I just thought she was talking on the telephone to her friends. I went to bed. About midnight, I got up and went down the hall to the bathroom, and the light was still on. So I knocked on her door, and she didn't answer. So I was concerned, and I called Dr. Greenson. He came over, and we couldn't get in.
Marilyn, wake up!
So he had to come through the window.
Dr. Greenson, who lived a short distance away, came over as soon as he could and broke a window outside, gained entry into Marilyn's bedroom, and found her dead on the bed. This is her story to me, at any rate. Mrs. Murray told me that Dr. Greenson entered the room, saw the pills, and found the body. At which time he called Dr. Engelberg, who was Marilyn's regular physician, who also lived in an immediate neighborhood, and he came over and pronounced her dead. Now, according to this story that I'm receiving at this time, this is all occurring shortly after midnight. And I got the phone call at 4:25 a.m. And if this story is true, this means that these people are staying in this house for 4 hours with a dead body.
This happened at midnight.
So I asked him, well, why did you not call sooner? Why did you let us know sooner?
Dead body for 4.5 hours.
And no one wanted to answer me. They tried to ignore me. But I thought that was important, so I pressed for an answer. And finally, Dr. Greenson spoke up.
We can't do anything until we're...
Incidentally, Dr. Greenson did most of the talking when I was there.
You have to understand, she's...
Dr. Greenson said we had to get permission from the publicity department of the studio before we could notify anybody. Now, that is rank nonsense. It's not an answer. There's certainly no truth to it.
Now, 70 pills commit suicide. Suicide, Officer Clements. Make sure you write that down.
The whole place was very neat. There was no loose ends around. The bed itself was very neat. Only the sheet was on the bed over Marilyn's body. There's a lot of reports about her having a phone in her hand. There was not when I was there. Not when I was there. And the whole house, or the part I saw of the house, everything had been picked up.
Jack Clemens has joined Bob Slater tonight as our guest. Mr. Clemens, welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Clemens, what about them made you think that Marilyn's housekeeper and her psychiatrist were lying to you?
Well, the story that they discovered the situation around midnight and they waited over 4 hours to call the police, that didn't make any sense at all. And I thought at that time that this would later be explained in the official report. So I didn't press the matter at that time.
All right, it's before dawn, and you arrive to investigate a death, and the washing machine is going. I mean, isn't that suspicious?
Yes, it is. However, as I related, the entire house was very neat, the part I saw of it. Everything had been picked up, nothing out of place. And I attributed all of this, and also the laundry equipment being in operation, to the fact that as I had thought at that time, that these people were very much concerned with public appearances, because 50 or 100 people were going to come in and out this house. She was very prominent, and a lot of publicity was going to be generated.
So from a public relations point of view.
That's right, yeah.
What do you make of it now?
Well, after I got into an unofficial investigation and was in it for a while, it became apparent to me that what was actually happening was evidence was being destroyed.
Mr. Slater, what did you see at the house that raised your antenna?
Well, the thing that struck me as being curious was the fact that the window Dr. Greenson allegedly broke to gain access to Marilyn's bedroom, the majority of the glass was lying on the outside on the ground rather than on the inside.
All right. Bob and Jane, if you'd come with me for a moment, please. If you break a window from the outside, logically, the glass would be on the inside. So, to prove a point, let's just demonstrate it. Dr. Greenson supposedly used a poker, fire poker, right?
Just like this one.
All right, and he was standing outside the window. Watch out for your eyes. And now, if we go off around to the other side, please. Can you tell us, please, Mr. Slater, is this what you saw?
No, this isn't what I saw.
I saw the glass on the outside on the ground, not on the inside. There was just a little bit on the inside.
Oh, so the broken glass was not on the inside like this, and that's why you think the window was broken from the inside out.
Absolutely.
Okay, other than Mrs. Murray's story about the window pane, what else about her story didn't hold up over time? How many different versions are you aware that she told?
There must be a dozen different versions over the years as she got older, and I know I was doing a little interview with her when she was doing a network broadcast back in 1985, and after she took a break, why, she sort of sighed and just kind of put her hands up like this and said, I am only telling them what they want to hear. And it's a well-known, and then right after that she admitted that Bobby Kennedy had been at Marilyn Monroe's house the night of her death.
Is that the one time you think Mrs. Murray might have been caught telling the truth?
Probably the only time.
Thank you, Mr. Slater.
All right. Despite all these contradictions, Mrs. Murray remains the backbone of the official story. To some, it began with a deception and kept snowballing further from the truth. We'll be right back in a moment.
Were the real circumstances of Marilyn Monroe's death covered up? Later, we'll present dramatic evidence that this cover-up is still going on. Welcome back to the Marilyn Files, live.
If you asked a cross-section of the American public, what happened to Marilyn Monroe, they'd probably answer suicide. There's a good reason for this popular belief. This is what the official investigation concluded. But according to Bob Slater and other investigators, this report is very far from the truth. So, Jane, let's go through the official story.
Let's start with what was told to Sergeant Clemens when he arrived on the scene. Mrs. Murray told Clemens that she discovered Marilyn's comatose body at approximately midnight. Now, Mrs. Murray would later say that she found Marilyn at 3:30 a.m., more than 3 hours later. And that later time would be entered into the official record. Police would never ask Murray about this 3-hour discrepancy in her story.
Mrs. Murray claimed that she immediately called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson. He in turn called Marilyn's physician, who pronounced Monroe dead 20 minutes later. Psychiatrist Greenson told Officer Clemens Marilyn had taken 47 Nebutol, sleeping pills, and an unknown quantity of chloral hydrate.
Chloral hydrate is a colorless, odorless chemical often used to give someone what was called a Mickey. In the early 60s, it was commonly prescribed as a mild sedative.
According to Jack Clemens, the official story that Marilyn had deliberately taken an overdose had been decided on well before he arrived on the scene.
Dr. Greenson, he pointed out to me that on a nightstand by her bed there was about 8 bottles, prescription bottles. It had contained various kinds of prescription drugs, mostly sleeping pills. And they were all empty. And I could still see the man as he stood there, and he goes like this. She must have taken all of these. He directs my attention. And I walk over, and I stick my head over, and I look down, and they're all empty. And we look for a glass that she could have used to swallow these pills, and there was no glass in that room.
One could never take that many Nebutol without water. The tablets themselves would choke the patient and be so dry and sticky in his mouth he couldn't tolerate it. And without water being present, I don't see how she could have gotten them down. And obviously she didn't get them down because they were never found in her stomach.
Here was a girl that had trouble taking an aspirin without a glass of water. And I have never seen her go and take pills or capsules without some type of a liquid. It was with her, she always said, I can't take something unless I've got something to drink it down with.
Women are very vain, and the history throughout the world of pathology is that they are very rarely ever found totally naked from suicide in which they take sleeping pills. They always have a nightgown or some other clothing on, and to find a girl such as this totally nude is almost out of the question.
Dr. J. DeWitt Fox has joined us this evening. Dr. Fox, welcome. Doctor, do you believe that Marilyn Monroe killed herself?
No, I do not. I think she was murdered, and I do not think that she took oral capsules of Nembutal because of what Bob Slater has said. She had to have water to take any single pill. To take 47 pills in a few minutes would choke her and would be found at the time of the autopsy, and there would also be capsules in her stomach. Neither one of these were found at the time of the autopsy.
I also have been given to understand that she had an aversion to taking medicine orally. Now, Dr. Fox, you mentioned that in your opinion, Marilyn Monroe could never have swallowed those 47 sleeping pills without water. How else then could the drug have been introduced?
By injection.
So what is your feeling, Doctor, about what really happened there that night based on your read of the autopsy?
The patient had 4 times the lethal dose of barbiturate in her bloodstream. There are 4 different toxicology reports. One of them had no barbiturate in the liver, which meant that if a rapid injection was given to her in her heart, which James Hall alleges happened, then that would circulate rapidly through the body, but would not be picked up by the liver because the patient would be dead.
And nothing would show in the stomach.
Exactly.
Well, these are only a few of the discrepancies in this case. According to a number of investigators, there's the official timeline of Marilyn's last few hours is wrong, and that she was dead hours before police were even called.
10 years ago, a man came forward with a shocking story that, if true, could account for many of the mysterious events the night Marilyn died. The key word here is could, for this witness has had his credibility called into question, even by some people who believe that Marilyn Monroe was murdered. His name is James Hall. He claims he witnessed the murder of Marilyn Monroe. When we return, we'll hear his incredible story.
A man came in carrying a doctor's bag, and he said, "I'm her doctor, give her positive pressure." So I took the resuscitator off, put an extension on the airway, pinched her nose, and was giving her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. That's as positive as you can get. And he started to give her CPR. And that's when he opened his bag, pulled out a hypodermic syringe with a heart needle already affixed to it, and said, "I have to make a show out of this." And he took a pharmaceutical bottle out of his doctor's bag, that's kind of a little rubber stopper on the top, and filled the syringe from that. He said, "We have to inject this between the whatever number ribs it is, 6th and 7th or whatever." And he counted down the rib cage, pushed her breast to the side, and stuck the needle into her chest. Although he did it wrong, it was at an angle, and the needle stopped. Instead of backing it out and starting over, he just leaned on it, and it would snap, and it broke her rib. He just shoved it right into her heart. At about this time, 2 men came in. The one man was wearing a Los Angeles police officer's uniform. The other was in civilian clothes. The guy in the civilian clothes went up to Patricia Newcomb, put his arm around her, and calmed her right down. And subsequently, I've identified him, too. And that was Peter Lawford.
Don't forget that Peter Lawford at that particular time was married to the sister of the president, Pat Kennedy. And he had every reason to go down there and protect him.
They gave me 6 polygraphs, and they hypnotized me twice. And they regressed me, and then made me remember who the doctor was, what he looked like. And afterwards, when they brought me out of hypnotism, we did a police identi-sketch. And at that time, one of the reporters walked by, and he says, "Hey, I know that guy." And they pulled out the pictures of Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, and that's who it was. We continued to do CPR at this point, and then the doctor put the stethoscope on her chest and said, "You can leave, I'm going to pronounce her dead." And I was sick. I mean, we had her saved. So.
James Hall has joined us tonight. Mr. Hall, welcome. Now, Mr. Hall, assuming that your story is true, it is very hard to believe.
Well, Bill, my story is true. Over the years, I've had polygraph tests. I've had 2 very extensive polygraph tests with 11 charts that all say that I'm telling the truth. And, of course, any time since Marilyn's death that anybody asked me about her, I always answered all of their questions.
All right. Now, let me ask you this. What do you think happened between the time you left and the time that Sergeant Clemens arrived?
Jack Clemens said that he found Marilyn's body in the master bedroom. When I left Marilyn in the guest house. Jack said that Marilyn was laying on the bed, face down, that she looked, she was in the soldier's position, like attention, with her arms down at her side, face down, and that she looked exactly like what she was, a dead body that had been placed in that position.
You think she was moved?
Yes, we left the house between 10 minutes to 4 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And Jack was called at about 4:30, so there was plenty enough time just to move her up to the master bedroom, and there were still 4 people there that could have carried her.
Mr. Hall, we spoke to the man you claim was your partner that night. His name is Murray Leibowitz, and he denies working that shift with you as your partner. What do you say to that?
Back in 1962, I rented an apartment, my wife and I, and my regular partner, Rick, and his wife rented the apartment next door to us. The apartment house manager was Murray Leibowitz, and we all worked together at Schaefer's Ambulance.
But why would he deny being your partner that night?
I don't know. Rick wanted that night off and had Murray fill in for him.
But it seemed a simple enough question. Who was your partner that night? Was your partner James Hall? And he says no. Why would a man do that to you all these years later?
I have no idea why he would say that.
Let me ask you, why did you wait 20 years to go public with this story?
I didn't wait 20 years. I came forward from the very first day, and anybody that showed any interest in what I had to say, I explained to them what happened that night.
Did you ever make any money from telling the story?
Oh, well, sure. You get paid for every show that you're ever on.
How much money would you say in total?
Total, since Marilyn's death, maybe $45,000.
That's quite a bit of money.
About $500 a year.
Keep in mind that there are no other witnesses to James Hall's story. Maryland psychiatrist Ralph Greenson died in 1979. Actor Peter Lawford passed away in 1984. For 30 years, former press agent Pat Newcomb has refused to comment. And you'll recall, the man Hall says was his partner that night denies that they worked together.
The Social Security records back up James Hall to this extent. The records show that Hall did work for the Schaefer Ambulance Company in Los Angeles on the night Marilyn Monroe died. On Monday of this week, Mr. Hall agreed to take a lie detector test, and we have the results on videotape. And we'll present them to you and to our panel when we come back from this break. So we'll be right back.
Next, an eyewitness describes the scene outside Marilyn Monroe's home on the night she died. A scene that might prove that her death was no accident. Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
As we promised, here's the videotape of the lie detector test taken by James Hall Monday of this week.
On August 10, 1992, a polygraph test was administered to James Hall. Hall willingly agreed to the examination. He was asked a prepared series of questions that directly related to his alleged involvement in the Marilyn Monroe case.
If the charts were numerically scored, it would definitely be on the plus side and a great number, showing him completely truthful. And from the charts that I've run here this morning, after interviewing Mr. Hall, I find James Edwin Hall to be truthful regarding the death of Marilyn Monroe.
All right, if I may, I'm going to ask the panel, Have you any questions for Mr. Hall?
I do, Bill. Now, Mr. Hall, isn't it true that 10 years ago when you first came up with this story, you were down and out in Las Vegas, dead broke?
No, I wasn't dead broke. I was working.
Did you have enough money to get home to Salt Lake City?
Well, I had enough money to get home to Salt Lake City, yes.
And but didn't you call the Globe and negotiated a contract to tell this story?
Yes, I did.
And you were paid $40,000 for it?
Yes, I was.
And on that very same day that you called the Globe, didn't you also call the district attorney in Los Angeles about giving him information?
No, ma'am. I talked to the district attorney about 2 or 3 days before I ever talked to the Globe.
And in this conversation, did you discuss the story that you've told here tonight?
Yes, to the district attorney, yes.
And did you refuse to testify at any inquiry because they wouldn't pay you?
No, I didn't refuse.
Mr. Hall, have you ever testified under oath in reference to this particular case?
No, I haven't.
Did you ask the district attorney for compensation for your story?
I asked the district attorney what he would pay for a story, yes.
And you ultimately didn't provide it to the district attorney, right?
No. He never called me back.
Mr. Leibowitz says that he was not with you that night. Have you talked to him about that?
No, I haven't.
You've indicated on some other occasions that he accepted hush money and bought 6 car washes. Have you checked that out?
No, I haven't.
You mentioned a man's name by Rick. What's Rick's name?
His name is Richard Charles Grider.
Have you talked to him?
Last time I talked to Rick was in Las Vegas.
Where is he now?
I have no idea. Last I heard he was in Houston, Texas.
They're the only 2 people that can corroborate your testimony.
And they both deny you.
Rick has denied me, not that I know of.
Mr. Hall, how long did you work for the Schaefer Ambulance Service?
Approximately 3 years.
And what were the circumstances surrounding your ending that employment?
The reason that I terminated my employment?
What were the circumstances surrounding the termination of your employment there?
We had gone to a court trial in Santa Monica. And
Isn't it a fact you were accused of theft by the Schaefer people?
Oh, yes, sure.
You were tried?
No.
You were tried, is that right, sir?
Yes, sir.
And what was the verdict?
Not guilty.
Okay.
Sir, your boss, Mr. Schaefer, at that time says that he read a run log that said that Marilyn Monroe was transported from her house to Santa Monica Hospital. Do you believe that?
No, sir.
So you're saying that your boss is lying?
Yes, sir.
Did you prepare any type of written report?
I would have a standard recap sheet that you turn in at the end of your shift, which would have been at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, not in the early morning when Walter Schaefer said that he saw it.
Did anyone ever ask you to not reveal your story, sir?
No.
They bribed Leibowitz, but they didn't ask you?
Nobody ever said anything to me.
No one's ever solicited you. You've always solicited them to tell your story. Isn't that right?
I've always told anybody that asked, and I've asked people too, yes.
No, sir. You sold this to everybody you've talked to publicly, haven't you?
No, sir.
All right, I'd like to thank the panel very much. As we said earlier, timing is very important if we're to unravel the mystery of Marilyn Monroe's death. Officer Clemens was summoned to Marilyn's home at 4:25 in the morning, but there's compelling evidence that Marilyn may have died as much as 6 hours earlier.
At 10:30 p.m., Marilyn's press agent, Arthur Jacobs, was notified that there was trouble at Marilyn's house. That would be a full 6 hours before Officer Clemens was called to the scene. Recently, we spoke with Arthur Jacobs' widow, Natalie Jacobs, about her recollections of that night.
On August 4th, 1962, I was attending a concert at the Hollywood Bowl with my husband, Arthur P. Jacobs. About more or less 10 or 10:30, a man came down the aisle and tapped my husband on the shoulder and said, "There's been a big problem at Marilyn Monroe's house, and we need you right away." My husband got up and left, and then after that, I did not see him for 3 days. It was 3 days later, and he said, "I just don't want to discuss anything." He said, "It's so horrendous." I don't believe she committed suicide.
There is more evidence that the official story's timeline is wrong.
Because at 1 a.m., again 3 hours before the police were officially called in, a neighbor of Marilyn's noticed a police car and an ambulance parked outside her home.
A few hours later, a neighbor of Marilyn's noticed another odd occurrence. An ambulance parked outside her home at 1 a.m. Abe Landau was interviewed for the first time in November of 1991.
Came home quite late. I think it must be close to 1 o'clock. And there was quite a few cars and an ambulance here. And we didn't know exactly what happened until we found out that she was dead.
We asked him if he noticed any police cars.
Yes, there was a police car.
When was that?
That was the same night.
At the same time?
Well, yeah. It was here with the ambulance.
Different reporters had asked Mrs. Murray if there had been an ambulance, and she had denied it all the way down until just back in 1985. And in 1985, when I just point blank asked Mrs. Murray if there were an ambulance at all, she said, oh yes, there was an ambulance. And she said that the ambulance arrived, now her estimation of time was sometime after midnight.
The mystery of Marilyn Monroe's death is greatly compounded by the fact that different ambulances were reported by different witnesses at different times that night. One was even reported to have taken Marilyn to Santa Monica Hospital, where she allegedly died at approximately 2 a.m. This ambulance then supposedly took Marilyn back to her home, and she was placed in her bed more than 2 hours before the official discovery of her body by Jack Clemens. At first, the owner of the ambulance company, Walter Schaefer, denied that any of his vehicles were at Marilyn's house. But later, in a recorded interview with Bob Slater, Schaefer would change his story.
I gained this information from the log sheet. Now, I came in on the next morning, and found on the log that we had transported Marilyn Monroe, and understood from the radio that she had died.
What were the observations of your driver and his attendant when they got to the house?
Well, she was completely contained and under the influence of barbiturates. And they didn't have too much to say about it. They took her into Code 3 into the hospital. And of course, that's where she terminated.
And what hospital was that?
Santa Monica.
Santa Monica Hospital? At the time when they put out the release on that and stated that she had been found dead in the bed of her own home, and she had died earlier at the hospital, did you ever think that there was anything strange about that?
No, I didn't. Anything can happen in Hollywood.
When we come back, we're going to begin our look at events that took place after Marilyn Monroe was pronounced dead. Events that some believe were orchestrated around one central premise: cover-up. Stay with us.
If you believe that an investigation should be reopened into the death of Marilyn Monroe, write to the Honorable Michael D. Antonovich, 500 West Temple Street, Suite 869, Los Angeles, California, 90012. Welcome back to the Marilyn Files.
The most obvious question we have to answer at this juncture is, if Marilyn Monroe was indeed murdered, how could the guilty parties have gotten away with it for over 30 years?
To many of the people who've investigated the events of that August night, the answer's pretty simple: cover-up.
On Sunday morning, August 5th, Marilyn Monroe's body was taken to the L.A. coroner's office. Her autopsy was performed by Thomas Noguchi, who would later gain fame as L.A.'s flamboyant coroner to the stars. This autopsy established two contradictory facts. First, he found a 4.5 milligram percentage of pentobarbital in her bloodstream. But secondly, during an examination of her stomach and intestines, he found no trace of any sleeping pills.
She was supposed to have taken 47 capsules of Nembutal at very few seconds, and had she done so, she would have probably choked on them, and they would have been present in her stomach. At the autopsy, there was not a single capsule found.
If Marilyn didn't swallow the lethal dose, then how could it have been introduced? One theory was injection. John Miner, the deputy district attorney, was present at the autopsy. He recalls that Dr. Noguchi looked closely for telltale needle marks.
It was a thoroughly professional autopsy that was done by Dr. Noguchi. We examined the body with magnifying glasses, both of us did, for needle marks, and that was a complete examination. There were no needle marks on the body.
The only thing I know is the fact that Dr. Engelberg and Dr. Greenson both submitted bills to the probate office of the courthouse to collect on money that Marilyn owed them for the month of July and the first few days of August of 1962. And in both of those reports, there is indicated that injections were given as recent as, I believe, the Friday before her death. And according to the forensic people who I have talked with, they said that those injection marks should have shown up somewhere.
Among those present during the autopsy was a deputy coroner's aide named Lionel Grandison. Grandison was privy to the inner workings of the coroner's office and soon became convinced that the true cause of Marilyn Monroe's death was being actively covered up.
I know from my participation that evidences were suppressed, paperwork were taken away from its files, that people who have knowledge of what happened have not either been listened to nor have they been sought.
At the time of Marilyn's death, the coroner in Los Angeles was Theodore Curfey. According to Lionel Grandison, Curfey had suppressed evidence and had files rewritten that would have otherwise contradicted the official story.
The discrepancy in the medical report, in the paperwork of that file and of that case, is one of the major reasons why, after 30 years, that this topic is still something for us to talk about. The file completely had been changed. I noticed the change in the autopsy report immediately.
Lionel Grandison was concerned. After examining the file, he decided to voice his reservations to his boss, Theodore Curfey.
When the file came to my desk for signing, I went to see Dr. Curfey. And I asked Dr. Curfey for the paperwork that goes on with the file. And Dr. Curfey told me, he says, well, don't worry about that. Just go on and sign the death certificate, and we will, I'll take care of that later. I voiced my concerns about the lack of information that was included in the file. And Dr. Curfey, and this last time, and this was not the first time he had told me, he said, sign this case, let's get it out of our hair, or else I'm going to do something.
What could be the motivation for these strange discrepancies in the official coroner's paperwork? Bob Slater has a theory that has been supported and incorporated into the new book by Peter Brown and Patty Barham, Marilyn, The Last Take.
Last week, this book was featured on the cover of People magazine. The authors and Bob Slater spoke with us about some of their conclusions.
I understand there were 3 death certificates that were made out and only one was used. The first one, I believe, said suicide ? And that was put aside by some political pressure, I understand, from the studio. And the second one said possible suicide, and the third one, which they used, said probable suicide.
That was very crucial to Fox's collection of the $13 million. Direct provable suicide would have negated a great deal of the insurance, particularly the $10 million in insurance policy with Continental Casualty. It was important for Fox, and as you know, they had tremendous clout with Chief Parker and in the coroner's office, that this certificate read probable suicide.
So both of you together, from your research, from the people you've talked with, from the hundreds that you've interviewed, you do not believe that a suicide in one way or another whatsoever?
No.
She was murdered in probably the biggest cover-up of the century.
This cover-up may have also destroyed key forensic evidence. Soon after the autopsy, the samples from Marilyn's stomach contents and her internal organs vanished. Without this vital evidence, no conclusions as to the real cause of death could be determined. We asked John Miner what happened to the organ samples.
They appear to have disappeared. They are not to be found.
Are there any other cases where organ samples have disappeared before?
No.
John Miner joins us this evening. Mr. Miner, welcome. The day of Marilyn's funeral, it was your job to interview her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, about her death. You concluded after that interview that her death was not, in fact, a suicide. What did Greenson say that made you conclude that?
As a condition for permitting the interview, Dr. Greenson required me to promise that I would not reveal the contents of the interview.
Was it an accident or murder?
It was accidental or murder.
Well, if it was not a suicide, can you not tell whether it's an accident or murder?
I don't know.
Aren't you putting your promise to Dr. Greenson above both justice and Marilyn Monroe's reputation to sit on this information for 30 years?
I don't believe so.
How's that?
Because you don't know the content of what was told me.
Well, I know, but by keeping it a secret, you've left a woman stigmatized with suicide.
I don't agree with you.
If you had information that she was, in fact, murdered after that interview with Dr. Greenson, wouldn't you have been compelled as a district attorney to report evidence of a possible crime?
That is true.
So are you saying it wasn't murder because you didn't report a crime?
I'm not saying that at all.
I don't think you're saying much. Forgive me. What do you think of James Hall's story?
To understand his story, you have to understand what a lie detector is. A lie detector can determine the probability that a person is telling the truth about what he believes. But it does not mean that it tells the truth that something actually happened.
Does that mean you're saying that he's lying and doesn't even know he's lying?
I'm not saying I can't enter his mind. I don't know why he told the story that he told. He may believe it, but it never happened, and it could not have happened based on the scientific evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Miner. I would like to invite the panel now to join the questioning. Folks, what you got in mind?
Mr. Miner, this panel is very concerned about the position you took when you were a former assistant district attorney for Los Angeles County. And we're concerned now with the position you're taking. You clearly knew, and as an officer of the court, you know that you had no privileged communication relationship with Dr. Greenson. You also knew, sir, that you have a constitutional duty, an ethical responsibility, if you will, to report any kind of potential criminal activity. As Attorney General, a former Attorney General for the state of Alabama, I think this possibly could rise to the level of being an obstructionist.
Mr. Craddock, should we give him a chance to respond?
Yes, I'd like to ask you, sir, one question. How can you reconcile your silence with your duty as an officer of the court to come forward and tell the proper authorities what Greenson told you so that we can finally get to the truth of this matter, sir? Would you tell us the truth?
Mr. Gray, since you don't know the content of what I was told in the interview, there's no way that you can charge that I failed in my duty.
Sir, you were an assistant district attorney. You were sent there to talk to Dr. Greenson, and even if you weren't sent there to talk to Dr. Greenson, you have a duty as an assistant district attorney if there is the slightest potential that a criminal act had occurred, or he could lead you to finally bring it to a conclusion. And sir, you haven't done that today.
Are you saying, Mr. Craddock, that you think he's part of the cover-up itself?
I'm saying that there is a good possibility that if there were an official inquiry conducted today, I think they'd take a hard look at you, sir.
Well, you're making assumptions that simply aren't so.
Would you provide the information if you were compelled to appear before a grand jury, if you were subpoenaed?
I'll face that bridge when I come to it.
Mr. Miner, haven't you for 30 years concealed the fact that within days of the death of Marilyn Monroe, your friend, Ralph Greenson, confessed to you that he or some third party killed Marilyn Monroe, accidentally or intentionally. Isn't that what you are withholding now? And if that's not what he said to you, what did he say to you?
I'm not going to tell you what he said to me, and you're assuming that he said any such thing along that line is utter nonsense.
How could you conclude, I'm sorry, this is driving me crazy, how could you conclude it wasn't a suicide?
It was based on the content of the interview, which I am not revealing. And that's that.
Did you make up this entire interview?
I beg your pardon?
Did you make up this entire interview?
I don't understand you.
With Dr.
Did you
Greenson?
actually have an interview with Dr. Greenson regarding the cause of Marilyn Monroe's death?
I did, and a report was made of that and made to Dr. Curfey at his request.
If he were put under oath, sir, would you tell the truth?
If I had to, sure.
Isn't it the fact that you're more concerned with protecting the reputation of your friend, Dr. Greenson, than you are with fulfilling your obligations as a former district attorney?
And an officer of the court.
I hear what both of you are saying, and since you don't know what I was told in that interview, you have no basis whatsoever for even making such a
It doesn't
suggestion.
matter what you were told in that interview. If you come out officially and say that Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide based on what Dr. Greenson said, that is direct evidence into the cause of her death. Period.
That's correct.
And you have an obligation as an officer of the court and as an assistant district attorney what that information was.
Well, I think the panel, I think we can safely conclude you all disagree on that point, and at that, we're going to toss to Bill.
All right, now it's time to address the first of our earlier two questions. Who would be able to facilitate a cover-up that would have compromised so many of Los Angeles' high-ranking officials? The answer to this question will take us straight to Washington, and it begins with a simple personal diary. We'll be right back.
Next, the contents of Marilyn Monroe's diary are finally revealed. Contents that suggest she may accidentally have written out her own death sentence. Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
Marilyn Monroe's diary has become something of a talisman among conspiracy buffs.
The last person who claims to have seen Marilyn's diary was Lionel Grandison. It was among the personal effects brought to the coroner's office after Marilyn's death. According to Grandison, what happened next is telling evidence that someone wanted Marilyn Monroe kept quiet permanently.
Lionel Grandison last saw the mysterious diary the day after Marilyn Monroe died.
I sent the drivers to her house to pick up any property or any information that would lead us to the next of kin. They came back with a book, the infamous Little Red Book. The book didn't have any references to any next of kin, but it had a very interesting series of stories, of assessments, of evaluations about things that were apparently going on in her life. John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Mafia, you know, those kinds of catchphrases. I mean, they were something to consider. There was something to look a little more thoroughly at and see what she was saying. I saw the book that Monday. We locked the property back up in the safe that Monday evening. That Tuesday, it was gone. Never to be seen again, at least in Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, to my knowledge.
According to Lionel Grandison, only 3 people had a key to the safe in the coroner's office. He thinks it possible that one of these individuals may have been approached by an outside government agency and pressured into opening the safe. This same cover-up may have extended beyond the coroner's office to the Los Angeles Police Department. Part of the motive may lie in the personal ambitions of the chief of police, William Parker, and his relationship with the Kennedys.
He was a very ambitious man. He wanted to be head of the FBI. That was his goal in life. Even to the point of trying to plant false stories about J. Edgar Hoover.
I know that he would like to have taken the head of the FBI, and he certainly would have been good at that. And of course, to get that job, you'd have to have Bobby Kennedy.
The official police investigation into Marilyn's death was conducted in a very perfunctory fashion. Police seemed content to accept her contradictory story at face value. Nobody interviewed Jack Clemens about his suspicions upon arriving on the scene. Nobody canvassed the neighbors in order to learn about the mysterious ambulances. No official explanation has ever been given to account for this slipshod investigation.
Lionel Grandison has joined us tonight. Mr. Grandison, welcome. This may sound silly, but is it normal for items to disappear from the safe like that?
Well, it's normal in that there's 3 departments within the coroner's office that does some type of investigation, so any of the departments might have had it. What is abnormal about it, it was probably taken during non-business hours, which means someone went there intentionally to take the diary.
So someone would have had to have the key in order to get in there. How many keys were there?
There were 3 keys, and that's my belief that it was taken out of there. But I didn't think much about it because of the sensitivity of what the information was inside of the diary.
Well, but weren't you concerned? Yeah.
Well, I was concerned because it was a part of her property, and it might have led us to what my job was there, to find a next of kin and do those kind of things.
Did you have any idea what a hot potato it was at the time, this diary?
Well, I really didn't have an idea. Some of the catchphrases that were in there were things that weren't talked about in 1962. We sit here in 1992 and we say CIA, Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy. But in 1962, when I looked at it could have been a beginning of a Hollywood novel. You know, I didn't know what it was, so I didn't really pay that much attention to it.
When the pieces of paperwork in the file started disappearing, would something else take their place in the official coroner's file?
You're right, and that's where my concern began. As I saw new toxicology reports, as I saw new autopsy reports, new police reports.
New doctored documents?
Well, they weren't doctored. They were just new analyzations of what the laboratory results were.
Were they based on anything?
Well, I had no way of knowing that. It was just my job to collect the information, and the medical department handled the dealing with it.
Seems a little unusual to me, but recently information has come to light that for the last 60 years, the LAPD had its own secret spy unit, whose job it was to gather information on a number of private citizens, among them Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys. Mike Rothmiller was a detective with this secret unit, known as the Organized Crime Intelligence Unit. He was privy to the secret file on Marilyn Monroe, and we spoke with him about how the LAPD could have helped cover up her death.
I spent 11 years with the LAPD, the last 5 years being in the Organized Crime Intelligence Division.
It's your contention that the LAPD had a spy network.
Oh, it's not a contention, it's a fact. I was part of it. It was absolutely secret, and before I went in, I knew there was such a unit, the Organized Crime Unit, but I had no idea what they did. As with probably 99% of the officers, they have no idea what the people in that unit do.
Were you aware of the file on Marilyn Monroe in the Intelligence Division of the Los Angeles Police Department? Were they keeping a file on Marilyn Monroe?
Yes, they were.
What was in it?
Oh, lots of information regarding her relationship with Peter Lawford, the Kennedys, everything you can imagine about her background, movies that she was in, a lot of just personal information.
Sexual information?
There was some in there, yes.
If the mayor wanted Marilyn Monroe's file after the fact, what would he have been told?
That it doesn't exist. Simply put, we don't have a file. We have no intelligence file on any person they're asking for.
Is it conceivable to you that documents would be changed or altered or disappeared for the purposes of cover-up?
Oh, absolutely. That goes without saying. I saw it firsthand. I'm aware of documents and aware of cases where that has been done.
I know that you were not there, but the night of Marilyn Monroe's death, the neighbors reported having seen cop cars coming and going, officers or plainclothes people in and out and around the property long before Marilyn Monroe's death was officially reported. Now, if that's true, what's your read on what was happening there?
Well, depending on the police cars, it might have been LAPD, it might have been the FBI, it might have been CIA. There's no telling who these people may have been. But if officers did arrive before the official report said they did, obviously somebody has doctored some information, either regarding times or they're just trying to remove witnesses from the scene. So these witnesses are now non-existent.
In the cover-ups that you've seen at the LAPD, would they have set up an officer like a Clemens as sort of a dupe to make it look like the cops were called in when in fact the dirty work had already been done?
They very well could be doing that.
To be a patsy.
Exactly.
And eventually drummed out.
Yes.
If Marilyn Monroe was in fact a woman who had an affair with John F. Kennedy, had an affair with Bobby Kennedy, and then committed suicide, why would anybody care? After all, the two principal objects of affair are dead.
I think they probably still would be interested because, one, it's historical, but two, you have to remember that in any intelligence file, it doesn't only deal with the individual. It deals with their associates, businesses they're involved in, so a lot of people may still be around in powerful positions.
One man who might be able to comment on these curious events has joined us. His name is Sam Yorney, and in the late summer of 1962, he was the mayor of Los Angeles. Mr. Mayor, welcome. Mr. Mayor, did you ever ask for the file on Marilyn Monroe?
Yes, I asked my police liaison officer to get me the file. I had very good relations with the police department. And he reported back that there wasn't any file.
Just as Detective Rothmiller said, that the mayor asked for the file and the mayor was told there wasn't one.
Well, he doesn't know whether I asked for it or not, but I did.
So, what do you think now? Was there one or not?
I think there must have been a file, but I don't know what happened to it.
Do you know whether Bobby Kennedy was in Los Angeles that night?
Yes, he was in Los Angeles because Chief Parker was very close to him, and Chief Parker volunteered to me that Bobby Kennedy was in Los Angeles the night Marilyn died.
And during the final rehearsal for this show, we were able to track down a man who might be able to shed more light on that last question. His name is Lynn Franklin. He retired as the most decorated police officer in Beverly Hills history. Mr. Franklin, welcome. Mr. Franklin, you say that not only was Bobby Kennedy in Los Angeles that night, but you pulled over his car for speeding.
Yes, I did. I stopped a late model Lincoln traveling through Beverly Hills eastbound on Olympic Boulevard at about 75 miles an hour in a 25-mile zone.
Who was in the car, sir?
Driving the car was Peter Lawford, whom I'd known for a number of years, and seated in the front seat with him was a man that I later identified as Dr. Greenson, Marilyn Monroe's psychiatrist, and in the back seat was the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy.
How'd you know he was in the back seat?
Peter Lawford, I asked him why driving so fast, and he said, I'm trying to get the Attorney General, and he looked over his shoulder to the Hilton Hotel to pick up his luggage. He has to fly out of town. And I shined my flashlight back in the back seat into the Attorney General's face and recognized him.
What was their general demeanor?
They appeared to be uptight, like they were in a hurry to get somewhere, and actually doing 75 miles an hour in a 25 zone. But they were uptight.
Didn't look like three gentlemen out on the town for fun.
No, they didn't.
Now, may I ask, did you receive a visit from the Secret Service after the traffic stop?
Yes, I did. A few days later, I received information that Bobby Kennedy had denied he was even in the L.A. area, that he was in San Francisco. So I thought, hey, there's something wrong here. Sort of, for my own curiosity, I went to the Hilton Hotel and checked out and found that he was registered there that particular night. I received a copy of the registration. A few days later, the chief called me into the station, and two Secret Service guys were there, and they demanded the copy of the registration that I had picked up at the hotel. I said, hey guys, go get your own like mine.
Well, what happened to that copy that you had?
Short while later, it came up missing from my files, stolen.
Now, you retired as the head of homicide and robbery. What do you make of the combination of events you were put through, or you experienced? What's your read on it?
You mean from what happened to me?
What do you make of that behavior and the follow-up visit by the Secret Service?
Oh, I think it was a total cover-up. You see, the Secret Service is sworn to protect the Attorney General and the President of the United States, not to expose them. They follow them around, and they know what is going on.
And that night, did you think anything funny of those guys trying to speed to the airport after Marilyn Monroe had been murdered?
at that particular time, I didn't know that she had been murdered. I didn't know until the next afternoon when I started to come back to work. And then I started putting two and two together.
All right, we're now faced with the central question of this entire investigation. Why? If we allow ourselves to believe that Marilyn Monroe was somehow murdered and a far-reaching cover-up immediately put into effect, we have to ask why.
When we come back, we're going to hear more compelling evidence that places Robert Kennedy at Marilyn Monroe's home on that fateful night, which, if true, might be the real reason behind the 30-year cover-up.
So stay with us.
Was Marilyn Monroe murdered? Why and by whom? Next, we'll confront these questions head-on and uncover answers that may shock you. Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live.
Bob Slater is back, joining us again live. Mr. Slater, we've heard a number of different accounts of what happened in Marilyn's house that night. What do you think is the real story?
Well, I think the real story is the fact that Bobby Kennedy went to Marilyn's house that night, and they got into a very heated argument, and this argument, by the way, was taped by a very top private detective in Los Angeles, and because her home was wired, as we know. Bugged. And to make a long story short, there was a loud argument, there was a body hitting the floor, and a CIA operative came in, gave Marilyn a lethal shot of Nembutal, and then went ahead with a couple of his friends to straighten up the house and wipe the prints off of everything. And also Peter Lawford came on about that time to go through the things at the house to see if there was anything incriminating against the Kennedys that he could destroy.
In your theory, are you accusing Bobby Kennedy of murder?
No, I'm not accusing him of murder. I am accusing him of participating in a murder. Well, considering the seriousness of those allegations, I feel it's appropriate to turn the questioning over to our legal panel. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Mr. Slater, were you present in Los Angeles the particular night that Marilyn Monroe died?
No, I wasn't.
And when did you have an opportunity to go to Marilyn Monroe's house?
About 3 days after her death.
Now, was it been a demonstration of the broken window? Did you actually see the broken window when you went to Marilyn Monroe's house?
No, the window had been repaired the night of her death.
Would you agree with me, Mr. Slater, that when the window is repaired, that it is normal, the normal course of events is to take the glass out from the outside and repair the glass from the outside?
That's true.
Did you have an opportunity to go inside Marilyn Monroe's bedroom?
Yes, I did.
Did you see any glass there at that time, or had the place already been cleaned up?
It hadn't been cleaned up completely.
Did you see any glass on the inside whatsoever?
A little bit.
Mr. Slater, you made reference to a bug or electronic device, or in any event, some kind of taping which disclosed the events that occurred that evening.
Yes, sir.
Have you listened to the tape, sir?
I haven't heard it, no. But it came from a very reliable source who knowingly was bugging Marilyn Monroe's house and also Peter Lawford's.
What is the name of that reliable source?
The reliable source is John Danoff.
And does John Danoff have the tape today?
This I don't know.
And you've never listened to it?
I haven't heard it, but I've heard a lot about it. All right. Thank you very much, panel. As we can see, something went very wrong at Marilyn Monroe's house that night. If Bob Slater's theory is correct, then a woman was murdered in order to protect a political dynasty.
When we come back, we're going to take a look at just how effective that cover-up was.
Next, a timeline that may have led straight to murder and a 30-year-old cover-up when The Marilyn Files returns. Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
Throughout the course of this broadcast, we've been pointing out contradictions in the official story of Marilyn Monroe's death. Now, some of these revolve around inconsistencies in the official story.
Ultimately, all of these inconsistencies may not hold true, but if even some of them are factual, then the official story is just plain wrong. Then the question becomes what really happened.
Many of the people who know what happened on the night of August 4th have kept their silence. Eunice Murray kept quiet for over 20 years about Bobby Kennedy's visit to Marilyn Monroe on the night she died. Marilyn's friend and press agent Pat Newcomb has refused all requests for interviews. Peter Laufer hinted to his wife about his role in the cover-up, but would never officially come forward.
And the men and women who've joined us this evening have all experienced ridicule and professional censure as a result of their personal investigations. Some of them believe there is an explanation for their mistreatment. The cover-up is still going on.
Shortly after the funeral, Mrs. Murray took off and went to Europe for a period of about 2 months, and according to the State Department, the places that she visited consisted of about 3 or 4 different countries. Pat Newcomb did the same thing. Pat Newcomb was gone for about an equal period of time, visited, I think, about 7 or 8 different foreign countries, and when she came back, instead of ending up in Hollywood, she ended up in an office adjacent to Robert Kennedy in Washington.
My partner that night, Murray Leibowitz, denies that he was ever there. He's been interviewed by numerous people, and he won't even talk on the interview. And subsequently, Bob Sleitzer did a radio talk show, and an ex-ambulance driver that rode with Murray after I had left the organization came forward and told Bob that Murray said, well, you remember I told you I'd tell you what happened to Marilyn that night. And he said, I'm not going to tell you that, but I will tell you this, that after her funeral, he said, I came into a very large sum of what you would call hush money. And he said, I bought these car washes, I own them, and the only reason that I'm still working at Schaefer's is to keep up the appearances.
I was not into this thing long at all before I began to get the feeling that I was not the first person on LAPD to know about this. I would talk to somebody, and it was obvious that I was not telling them anything. And I got a reaction that is not normal for policemen. I would tell them this, I would tell them Bobby Kennedy was there, etc., and it's a case of murder, blah, blah, blah. And they would look at me, and they would say, well, that's very interesting, Jack. And they would turn around and walk away. No comment. Nobody was talking.
I don't remember what year it was, but Chief Parker was not chief then, he was dead. And I asked the police department to send me any records they had about Marilyn's death, and they said they didn't have anything. And that surprised me because I had a very good relationship with them, and I didn't think they had anything. I found out later they probably did.
It seems apparent that there are some people who have their own reasons for keeping their silence. But their silence will not prevent some hard questions from being asked. There are just too many contradictions surrounding the death of Marilyn Monroe.
When we come back, we're going to ask our panel of prosecutors whether they think there are enough contradictions to warrant a new grand jury investigation. Stay with us.
Was Marilyn Monroe the victim of foul play? Can the official investigation be reopened? What will our jury decide? There will be answers to these questions and more when we return.
Carl Belton for a...
Welcome back to The Marilyn Files, live from Hollywood.
Tonight we've tried to present all of the available evidence that points to foul play in the death of Marilyn Monroe. If a crime was committed, then this crime should be investigated. And one last time, let's summarize.
The contradictions between the facts and the official story are almost too many to mention. Some of the most salient questions remaining. Taken 47 sleeping pills when no capsules were found in her stomach. How could she have swallowed the pills when water to the bedroom was cut off and there was no glass near the bed? Why was she pronounced dead at nearly 4 a.m. when the condition of her corpse would suggest she died hours before? Why were there no needle marks found at autopsy when 2 of her doctors billed her estate for various injections given to Marilyn within 36 hours of her death? What happened to the body parts removed at autopsy and the pieces of tissue? What about the half-dozen people who saw Bobby Kennedy visit Marilyn at home the night of her death? Why were there so many ambulances spotted outside the home that night? What happened to Marilyn's personal diary? What did this man, Marilyn's psychiatrist, confide to the DA the day of the funeral that convinced the DA her death was not a suicide? Was Marilyn Monroe worth more immediate cash to her studio dead than alive? Did the insurance money influence her death? How about the CIA? Was there any role? How about the mafia? And perhaps most significantly, who had the power to orchestrate and maintain a cover-up still in place after 30 years? Was this a cover-up for the Kennedys? And if so, were they covering up extramarital affairs or murder?
Those are the questions that still beg for answers after 30 years.
Our panelists heard the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn. What are your opinions? John Monnier, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, first off, I find the autopsy has no integrity whatsoever. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's incongruous. I therefore would request that an exhumation take place. And I don't mean any disrespect to Miss Monroe. I just think that should be done. And an independent coroner or an independent pathologist. And along those lines, I'd have to say that the officials, I think, have lost objectivity a long time ago in this particular case. So therefore, I request an independent prosecutor be appointed. Following along those lines, a grand jury should be convened. I understand there's been grand juries in the past, and they have not been successfully allowed to complete the investigation. Justice demands in our country that it be fair and impartial. I find nothing fair and impartial in what has taken place. As to Mr. Hall, a lie detector is given often to somebody that's suspected of lying. I find that his credibility and reliability have been greatly impeached. As to Mr. Minor, I find his conduct absolutely despicable in reference to his public duty.
Charles Graddick.
Jane, Bill, my judgment is that Marilyn Monroe did not commit suicide. Certainly a grand jury investigation should have been conducted in 1962. It was not. There is some evidence which leads one to believe that there was a cover-up and continues to be a cover-up, including a cover-up maybe involving Bobby and John Kennedy. My recommendation is that a grand jury should be impaneled immediately. These individuals should be put under oath, and maybe we could get to the bottom of this matter.
Kate Barrett.
Well, so much of what we've heard tonight and what's been presented is speculation on the part of the witnesses and Mr. Slater. The problem with dismissing that as just that speculation is that there has not been a complete and thorough investigation that you can rely on. I would think that it would be appropriate to have an investigation where you would compel the testimony under oath of Mr. Meyer, Pat Newcomb, Dr. Engelberg, and Ms. Murray.
Joseph Fusco.
I agree with what's been said. It's clear to me that a cover-up occurred to protect Robert Kennedy. It's unclear to me whether or not Marilyn Monroe died accidentally or as the result of a homicide. I agree. I think Mr. Minor, Newcomb, and Ms. Newcomb and Dr. Engelberg are all in Los Angeles, and their testimony should be compelled. And the other testimony that's not under oath, or statements under oath, should be put under oath so we have something that's reliable.
Very interesting. No.
Thank you. I agree that grand jury proceedings should be convened immediately. I believe that an independent prosecutor is the only one that could give a fair color to this proceeding. Any of these theories are possible. It just seems improbable that the Kennedy theory could come about and leave that diary still in the house.
Thank you very much, panel.
Thank you, panel. Now, throughout the course of this broadcast, we've shown you an address where you can write to voice your opinion on what you have seen. Only public outcry can solve this case. Time is running out.
The men and women who do know the truth need to tell what they know sooner rather than later. Otherwise, the cover-up will have worked, and the truth will never be known. Marilyn Monroe deserves far better. I'm Jane Wallace.
And I'm Bill Bixby. And good night.
Good night.
In 1985, at the instigation of Bob Slater, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors unanimously recommended that the investigation into the death of Marilyn Monroe be reopened. The Los Angeles County Grand Jury and the Judge of Criminal Courts unanimously concurred. After examining all of the evidence, the grand jury and its foreman agreed that a conspiracy was involved in Marilyn Monroe's death. A press conference to announce this official inquiry was scheduled. The day of the conference, L.A. County District Attorney Ira Reiner announced the firing and replacement of the grand jury foreman, the first time in California history that this has ever occurred. The newly appointed foreman promptly shut down the investigation. To this day, the cover-up continues. But the Marilyn files remain open.